This story begins with intensity as we witness a meeting between the King of Hortensia and the Duke of the Principality of Camellia. The latter feels betrayed for some reason and decides to transform into a werewolf to kill the king. This attack was already planned because the soldiers of Camellia begin to attack the city at the same time. At this moment, we meet Fernando, a Templar Knight of the Kingdom of Hortensia. He fights his way through the soldiers until this talking cat informs him that Princess Mariel is in danger because the king has been attacked. Fernando decides to meet up with his brother Mauricio, the captain of the knights, and Adele Jade, another of his comrades. The latter decides to stay behind while the other two go to save the princess, as a bunch of monsters begin to appear through summoning rituals, which must be hunted before they start harming people. The brothers reach the throne room and are faced with a grim scene: a dead king, his bodyguard on the brink of death, and a completely traumatized princess. The worst part is that Mauricio receives a surprise attack from the monster, which destroys one of his eyes. Fernando decides to face it alone, even if it's the last thing he does. We don't see the outcome of this battle because we switch to observing a boy named Alfred, who notices through the window that someone wounded is approaching his house. He immediately runs downstairs to open the door and orders his servant, Honoria, to light a fire to warm this person who has come under the rain. To the surprise of our young protagonist, the one who arrives is his uncle Mauricio, who brings his brother's sword to inform him that, unfortunately, he died in that battle. Okay, first, let's put this into context. I must explain that we are in the Lepida Peninsula, where the Kingdom of Hortensia has existed for more than 700 years. This kingdom has always been under attack by foreign countries but had the help of the principalities of Oliver and Camellia. However, the latter orchestrated a rebellion under the command of Duke Rugas. In that attack, the king died, and the princess disappeared, leaving her brother as the new king of Hortensia in a moment of chaos because the monsters began to appear more frequently. A few days later, Alfred has taken control of the town as his father's successor, as his uncle prefers to lay down his arms and educate the protagonist to become a man worthy of his father. Additionally, we are introduced to this mysterious boy called Marius. Let's not fool ourselves because I'm sure it's pretty evident that he is the missing princess. However, the story that Mauricio tells is that he lost his family in a fire, and Fernando saved him. Now he is taking a walk around the city to clear his mind and ends up at a kitchen with a tomb, where he begins to cry, thinking of all those who died and how lonely he must feel. His brother, Alfred, arrives at this place because the tomb there belongs to their family, where their mother and sister rest, and soon their father too. So she is not the only one who has lost almost all of her relatives. He tells her that they must celebrate being alive thanks to their father's sacrifice, so they must continue living to honor him. Mariel is determined to follow a new path, as she wants to become stronger to protect the person she loves. To see progress on this path, we must move forward 4 years into the future, where Alfred is currently leading a reinforcement troop that will serve as support. In the confrontation with the soldiers of Camellia, when they arrive at the battlefield, they realize that all their allies have fallen, as only a few wounded soldiers remain trapped. This is because Camellia's most famous squadron of archers decimated them. These archers were waiting for the protagonists to appear to ambush them. As a result, Alfred and Mariel are forced to personally help those two. The protagonists fight against the enemy army to buy time for the wounded to escape. However, both are struck by arrows shot by none other than Roy, the commander of this squadron. This guy is a bastard, but at the same time, he's a formidable warrior, as he's able to completely humiliate both the blonde and the protagonist at the same time. Moreover, he does this by fighting hand to hand with his bow, alternating between strikes and arrow shots. The redhead manages to bring both of them to the ground while mocking Alfred because he's not even a shadow of what his father was. But Roy doesn't have time to finish them off because Mauricio arrives, and this guy does scare him a bit. But before leaving, he tells the protagonist to cry because his allies died completely in vain. Mariel wakes up several hours later in her bed, under the watchful eye of Noria, who was worried the whole time because she hadn't woken up. The blonde asks about the protagonist, who is visiting the family grave because he feels bad about his weakness and believes he's failing in his duty as the protector of this town. Mariel arrives and tells him he shouldn't torment himself over it, as their squad returns safely to the town. Although that doesn't change the fact that the redhead wiped the floor with both of them. Well, it's just a matter of training more and getting stronger together. They shouldn't be too hard on themselves since this was their first mission, and not having any casualties is a total achievement. Besides, there will be more opportunities to attack in the future and maybe even for revenge because we see the redhead meeting with Ruggies, who is still alive. Now we see the moment when Mauricio managed to reach an abandoned cabin with the princess, where he told her she would have to cut her hair and live under a new identity with a new name. I don't quite understand why she has to do this and not her brother, but as long as we're at it, they should have at least chosen a new name that didn't resemble the old one so much. As a curious fact, there were legends of the fictional world known as Magania, in which there were floating islands and all sorts of legends. Suddenly, these monsters began to appear during the attack on the kingdom, so now they must live fighting against these beasts. This is precisely what the protagonist and his uncle are currently doing, as it serves as training. As for Mariel, she is helping Noria carry some supplies but stops for a moment to visit the family grave to leave some flowers. This is a custom the maid has every time she runs an errand. Apparently, she joined the family 4 years ago, a few months before Mariel's arrival. She had lost her family, and Fernando gave her a new home. From the beginning, she got along well with Bernadette, the protagonist's younger sister, who had a weak body since birth. But that wasn't what ended her life. It was a tragic carriage accident caused by a landslide. Noria loved all the family members a lot, so she wants to make the last remaining one, Alfred, happy. Along the way, they run into 2 children they always play with. They ask if they know when Alfred will face the monster of the Tron Cave. This is a legend about a monster that can take any form, from a dragon to a serpent or even a giant wolf. The latter brings back quite a few bad memories from Mariel. Anyway, not everyone believes in these legends. The older sister keeps teasing her brother precisely because of this, even though he wants to go to confirm if it's true and see it change forms. Alfred is concerned that this legend might be true, given the appearance of the other monsters, so it's better to go hunt it down before it attacks the town or some curious child goes to the cave. Mariel remains distracted by this whole wolf situation, so much so that she gets scared when she hears a howl in the forest while heading to the cave. She asks the protagonist if he's not afraid or doesn't hate werewolves because one was the one that killed his father. But he doesn't hold any special grudge. No matter who the enemy might be, his father would have had the same fate someday and would have died with honor. Those 3 enter the cave at the same time. The boy's mother goes to the mansion because her son went to the cave to prove to his sister that the legend is true. The good thing is that the protagonists are also there. The bad thing is that the place is like a labyrinth, and they might not find him. Thus, Honoria decides to grab some luggage and go to the cave to warn them. The 3 warriors reach a point of no return after having cleared a large part of the cave of the monsters that lived there. Therefore, they decide to return for the day, being extremely careful on the way back so as not to get lost, something that non-Noria didn't manage, as she is already lost. The good thing is that the servants and the cat's foolishness is on the same level as that of a child, so they got lost in the same place as the boy they were looking for. The important thing is that they are together and might be able to find the way out. That is, if we don't take into account the goblins that appear and start chasing them. During this chase, Honoria drops one of her hair ties, which later causes her trouble as they stop for a moment to use food as bait to distract the monsters. The plan works, but her loose hair covers her face, and she trips. The noise attracts the monsters again, who are not only behind them but also coming from the front. Everything seems lost for these 3, but don't worry because this isn't the end. Here, the protagonist arrives just in time to save the damsel in distress, something that Nori had put all her faith in. It turns out that Mariel saw the servant's ribbon on the ground and, fortunately, they were able to find them in time. So everyone is safe. Non-Noria recovered her ribbon, and they can return home. That would be ideal, but suddenly a part of the cave starts to glow, so Alfred and Mariel go to investigate. It turns out this is a spring from the legend of the cave monster, so they have entered enemy territory without realizing it. A werewolf attacks them by surprise. Mariel is terrified because it looks exactly like the one that attacked the palace, which obviously brings back all those dark memories. Alfred, on the other hand, can't help but feel an uncontrollable rage towards the monster that took his father's life and begins to attack recklessly. It is Mauricio who arrives to tell him that it is a shapeshifter because the cave monster has simply taken its form, so he must stay calm at all costs. These words don't work on Mariel because she starts walking backward without realizing there was nowhere to step, so she ends up falling into the water. We go back in time to see what happened after the king was attacked. Apparently, Mauricio fled with the princess at the request of his brother, who ended up dying at the hands of the werewolf. The now half-blind Templar captain managed to meet his master, old Baljosser, who helped him escape through a secret passage. He told him that strange things had been happening in the palace for a long time, ever since the new pope took office, and gave his blessing to Prince Charlotte to have a puppet king. This means that the current king's death was planned from within the palace, so they will want to get rid of Mariel if they find out she is alive. That's why the old man decides to stay in the palace, because he wants to do everything possible to prevent them from finding out about the blonde and, at the same time, ensure that the prince keeps living. After that, Mauricio took the princess to the protagonist's village, where we end that memory as Mariel wakes up in Alfred's arms. They had already defeated the monster, which, according to what Bernadette told the servant, had the ability to read people's minds and transform into what they fear most, so the protagonist believes it was a product of his mind. Now they return to the village, reunite the boy with his mother, and Alfred scolds the servant and the cat a bit for putting themselves at risk since they are also part of his family, and he would never want to lose them. Now, we are introduced to this wandering warrior named Deaf Float, a man who is being chased by guards as he has been accused of some serious crimes. He claims to be innocent, but, knowing they won't believe him, decides to throw a smoke bomb and hide after stealing the wanted poster. The funniest thing about all, he is angrier about his cheap reward than about being falsely accused. We are also given some context about the current state of the Kingdom of Hortensia. As planned by the Pope, he takes responsibility for being Charlotte's guardian. The Church has taken control of the country, and the Templar Knights are under the command of the ecclesiastical order. The protagonist and his uncle are in the capital because they received a letter from the aforementioned order, something that doesn't sit well with Mariel because she knows that the Pope is corrupt and fears that he might harm Alfred. However, the one who summoned him is this guy here, named George, the captain of the ecclesiastical order and an old friend of the family, who wants to share an important secret with them. It turns out that there is a village called Petale that had a plague 2 years ago. The disease in question hardened and turned people into statues, which is why it came to be called the Petrides Plague. They are tasked with investigating this ghost town unofficially, which currently has prohibited entry and exit. This is because people have supposedly seen human-shaped monsters near that place, as if the dead had come back to life. They accept the mission, although Mariel isn't too happy about it since the church said that the disease was caused by a curse placed by a witch. Using the excuse of hunting her to cure the village, the church imposed a quarantine and supposedly is still hunting her, although this seems to be an invention. Or they simply aren't interested in finding her to use the fear to control the country. Alfred doesn't doubt that this could be true, but speaking that way about the church will only bring trouble, so he advises Mariel to moderate her speech a bit. The protagonists arrive at the village and realize that the fence is broken, which means that someone is there or the zombies have escaped. Mariel gets a bit scared and takes out a flower given to her by Honoria because Bernadette told her that this flower is a charm that would make the zombies stay away from them. At that moment, they hear a person scream, and it turns out that Deaf Float is the one who sneaked into the village without knowing where he was getting into, so he is surrounded by zombies that he doesn't want to attack for some reason. Mariel recites the charm, which unfortunately has the opposite effect of what Honoria had told them, as all the zombies start chasing her. Alfred decides not to hold back and takes out all the zombies by himself in front of Deaf Float's eyes. This warrior asks who the protagonists are, and the blonde slips up by saying that they are on a mission from the church, which angers the blue-haired man a lot and makes him attack them. Mauricio blocks his attack and tells him to calm down because they don't belong to the church. They are only there because they were formerly Templar Knights. To Deaf Float, that is the same as being a dog of the church, so he warns the protagonist not to get in his way again. After exploring for a while, they see that everything is covered in dust, which probably comes from the stone statues that must have disintegrated. In the middle of this conversation, Alfred deduces that Deaf Float is originally from this village, which is why he didn't want to attack the zombies. That's why they go to the church to find him, assuming he will be paying his respects to the deceased, which turns out to be spot on. It turns out that the blue-haired man left the village long before the plague, so he only heard a rumor or two. Mauricio asks him if he recognized any faces among the zombies, which gets a negative response from the warrior, something completely normal considering that the monsters appear from magic circles and come from another world. So he can be at ease because none of his friends turned into zombies. Inside the church, they find the priest's diary, and here comes the sad part, as it seems that the Pope informed them that all of this was a test from God. That's why they were prevented from leaving the place, and all they could do was pray that the one above would deem them worthy of salvation. Deaf Float starts to cry because, until the last moment, his father kept believing in that so-called God. The fact is, his father was the very priest. Initially, he loved him a lot, but after his mother's death, the priest wouldn't stop insisting that his son follow in his footsteps, leading to argument after argument until he kicked him out of the village. Deaf Float ended up hating him, but he can't help feeling sadness for the horrible misfortune his father suffered along with the rest of the village while he was wandering the world. Suddenly, they arrive. Some members of the Order try to disrupt the emotional moment because they believe that the protagonists are the ones resurrecting the dead, causing the witch's curse to resurface. They decide to burn down the entire village. FL Float curses them and their god for being such. Well, you know what I mean, which leads them to attack, but Alfred stops them. He refuses to let anyone cause trouble for a person who is simply mourning the dead. At that moment, a giant zombie with weapons appears and takes out all the members of the Order before starting to attack the protagonists. Mariel sees a bunch of those strange flowers and wants to give the ritual another try, but FL Float warns her that those plants are what made the zombies in the legend stronger, which is probably why this one has grown so large. Among all those flowers, only one can complete the ritual, and it needs to be blessed by those in the afterlife. So, Mariel takes the one that the blue-haired person left on her mother's grave. This ritual cancels the tremendous regenerative ability the zombie possessed, so now they can finally defeat it after a few more blows. Lastly, they put up graves for all those who were never buried according to the records, and meanwhile, we hear the priest's voice reciting the last words he wrote in his diary. He was the last one to die in the village but was willing to accept this horrible test from God because his son wasn't there, so he was able to pass away with a smile. Mariel is worried because one of the members of the Order recognized the protagonist as a knight, which means someone must have informed them they would be there, and it could only have been the captain. But that can wait because now it's time to celebrate that Deaf Float is going to join the group, as Alfred wants to recommend him as a knight so that he can be under his command and help take care of his village. Something the blue-haired person eagerly accepts. It seems that the situation on the FR Terra border with Carmelia is getting pretty tense, so Pope Alexis indicates that they should send reinforcements just in case. Meanwhile, the protagonists head towards the capital to see if they can discover anything about Jork, as they can't dismiss the suspicions they have about him regarding the conflict. The narrator introduces us to the Darren Empire, the same one that has been trying to invade the peninsula for over 700 years and has now formed an alliance with the Principality of Camellia. On the way to the capital, our protagonists come across several destroyed merchant carriages, something that doesn't seem to have been done by bandits because the goods are still there. FL Float notices something moving inside one of the carriages and decides to investigate, finding a pair of twins who seem to belong to the Empire. Alfred believes someone must have kidnapped them near the border, so they plan to hand them over to the ruler of the nearby town. But Mauricio suspects that they might be the ones responsible for the attack. In the town, Deaf Float starts flirting with the first woman he sees to gather information about the local lord and to try his luck. She explains that the lord of the town simply left with all the tax money because they've been under attack by monsters and he preferred to live comfortably. The villagers have decided to remodel his mansion to turn it into a church, believing that not having one is what attracted so much poverty to the town. And with God's blessing, the monsters will surely stop coming. Mariel thinks this is nonsense, but Mauricio tells her to leave them be. They are just clinging to hope, and it would be very unfair of her to bring them down if they aren't going to do anything to fix the situation. As for the twins, it seems they'll have to take them to the capital because they don't trust anyone but the protagonist. They don't talk much and constantly seek refuge with him, possibly because Alfred already has experience taking care of his sister, giving him that big brother aura. He treats them kindly, mainly because they remind him of Bernadette. Unfortunately for the protagonist, these two twins have something quite evil planned, as they whisper about their schemes at night, although they've put them on hold for now because they've grown fond of him. Once they reach the capital, an old friend who has known the protagonist since childhood appears, a giant named Bertrand, who suggests taking the twins to the capital's orphanage, as they are unlikely to be accepted anywhere else due to the current conflict in the Empire. Alfred tells Mariel and Deaf Float to accompany Bertrand, while he and his uncle have to go present the mission report. The problem is that Mariel gets distracted by the castle, thinking about her brother, and the twins use that moment to escape. Meanwhile, Alfred tells Jork everything, but the truth is that they never doubted him because they know him well. They only want him to tell them everything he knows about the matter. The captain of the order informs them that the church has roots everywhere. Its influence is much greater than everyone thinks. He is known for trying to do things right, which displeases some people. That's why they're probably watching him, and they sent those knights of the order to follow them to prevent them from discovering the hidden truth behind the town of the plague. Only a few people would be capable of doing something like that. But before giving us their names, a loud explosion alerts everyone. The explosion was caused by the twins, as we see Roy talking to Rugas about having sent them to the capital to have fun and find something that this werewolf man had lost. It seems that a bunch of specters have appeared around the capital because the twins, now introduced as Saria and Elva, are searching for a sacred relic that is in the hands of the Pope. The protagonists gather at the cathedral and begin to fight off the specters that are being summoned and enter the building. There, Alfred discovers that they are responsible for this chaos due to the explosion and summoning of the monsters. But what angers him the most is hearing that they did it for fun and that they work for Rugas. The twins' magic is quite powerful, but Alexei can dispel it thanks to the power of the sacred relic. However, reinforcements for these two have arrived, a giant dragon and the strongest creature from the legend of Magania. To face this monster, only one person is suitable, the Black Knight Didier, the king's bodyguard, who is strong and fast enough to bring the dragon to the ground. Unfortunately, it seems that he didn't hurt it because they didn't show any wounds on the animal, likely due to CGI. Additionally, the twins manage to climb onto the dragon and escape, leaving this guy as just a mere distraction. At least he's there for something, which is to make it clear that both he and the Pope have been watching every move George makes. Oh, and the dragon turned out to be this woman from Camellia named Teresia. It's time to go back in time exactly 6 years when the Duke of Camellia was an ally of the Kingdom of Hortensia and defended the border from imperial attacks. Sometimes they were overwhelmed, but Fernando and Leo always came to the rescue, the latter being the Duke of the Principality of Olivier, who also died in the royal hall with the king. Do you remember Adele Jade? She is his adopted daughter who took her father's place as the commander of the Templar Order. However, this was almost rejected by the church. They also stripped Olivier's principality of its independence and annexed it as part of the Kingdom of Hortensia. Now, we see the Pope and the Benhumo discussing that they must take complete control of Olivier, as they cannot allow a witch to roam freely. I don't know if they are referring to Adele Jade or this girl who is having visions about her. The protagonists are currently in this city to deliver a letter from the captain, as he belongs to the moderate faction and has his hands tied since Didier's extremists are the majority. Although Olivier has been annexed to the kingdom, its influence is still very high, which is why George wants to have them as allies to end the abuses of power exercised by the extremists. To do this, they decide to speak with Adele Jade, who realizes that she has Mariel in front of her but cannot say anything about it because the blue-haired one starts flirting with her. She also quickly understands that there must be a reason why she is pretending to be someone else, so she pretends to be ignorant with a relieved smile. She likes the plan to help the captain of the order, but unfortunately, her response will have to wait until the situation calms down, as suspicious activity has been detected at the port in recent days. At least she stays alone with Alfred for a while to talk because both of them share the fact that they lost their parents during that invasion. It's never a bad idea to reminisce about the old times. She used to train with her father and always wanted to defeat him one-on-one, something she will never be able to do because of Rugas, who took away her chance to make her father proud. That's not the only thing this world tries to take from her, as the extremists of the order start taking several women at random in a witch hunt. This is an excuse for Adele Jade to confront Didier, who accuses her of continuing to search for Princess Mariel, who is actually a witch that conspired to kill the previous king. You know, a stupid tale to have a reason to finish her off so that she doesn't become an ally of the moderate faction. Adele Jade begins to fight these idiots, and Mariel joins her, which could turn them into enemies of the kingdom if Alfred draws his sword. Adele Jade decides to surrender to protect her people and also Alfred. However, at that moment, the dragon appears with a fleet from Camellia that wants to seize control. Oliver, along with all those present, decides to call a truce to defend the kingdom. Everyone begins to fight, creating tremendous chaos, but there is an important battle here. Adele Jade already knows how the Camellia soldiers fight, so she knows that the commander must be quite close. Indeed, she finds Roy on a small hill. This duel is personal for her because Roy was in the throne room when Leo was killed by Rugas. She harbors deep resentment towards both of them for being traitors, which is the same reason why she wants to finish them off no matter what. The redhead tells her that this kingdom is rotten from the inside and refuses to see the truth. The protagonists arrive to help her with the battle and prevent her from dying by fighting recklessly out of anger. But the surprise is that Roy withdraws even though he had the advantage. He claims to do so to protect her, something that Alfred notices later when Didier is about to take her away. The protagonist tells the Benhum to release Adele Jade because she was vital to the enemy army's retreat. Additionally, this attack could happen again, and Olivier's soldiers need the moral support of their leader to stay motivated. Didier agrees because he could see this woman's loyalty to the kingdom, although she is still not free from all suspicion. They will return, but that is merely a threat to prevent her from joining Captain George. Alfred speaks alone with the Duchess of Oliver because he has begun to doubt what they are doing. Every time he grabs the sword his father left him, He doesn't know who he should point it at since the church is showing how rotten it is. Lastly, we see the girl who was having visions of Adele Jade, who turns out to be Teresia. She informed Rugas about this because she was worried about her, which is why the leader of Camellia proposed this operation to save her. In theory, he does it to divide the kingdom, but the redhead and the little dragon are not sure whether to believe him or not because deep down, he is a man who will do anything for his people. At least, that is the image they have of him. In my opinion, the truth is that he is just a madman, although it is also true that the church is also rotten. The next chapter begins with Mariel narrating one of the legends of Magania, which speaks of a princess who was exiled and fled to an island where she found a giant stone. She was attacked by her pursuers, but the statue came to life and defended her. Together, they returned to the kingdom and reclaimed it. The island where this story takes place is precisely where the protagonists are now, by the captain's orders, as a girl claiming to be Princess Mariel has appeared, and a small army has begun to form to support her. The leader of this army is a man named Jim, who is giving a speech, but the blonde is worried about this whole situation since she doesn't know when she will be able to tell everyone her true identity. This is something Mauricio has left to her decision, but he recommends that she do so when she is strong enough to protect herself. Now let's look at the imposter who seems more like an idol than a princess. She is also deceiving this whole group of fools along with Jim, as they built a giant wooden robot to simulate the one from the legend. Mariel is quite annoyed to see her image ridiculed in this way, and wants to put an end to all of this. Later, we see that the idol also seems disgusted by this act, even more so when some soldiers approach to inform both of them that the order has started a witch hunt, with her as the main target. So they plan to counterattack the capital. This isn't the only problem, as the rumors about the princess have reached the twins' ears. So they have also come for her, and if she turns out to be an imposter, they will make her pay for wasting their time. The protagonists meet with the imposter to confront her, but she offers no resistance and apologizes for all the trouble she caused. Her real name is Mary, and all of this started as a game that got out of hand because she and her childhood friend wanted to relive the old days to calm their worries about the existing monsters. He pretended to be a knight, and she, Princess Mariel, but some drunk warriors believed she was the real princess, and began telling her about the church's abuses. Mary only wanted to give them a little hope, not knowing that things would go this far. The more the group grew, the more afraid she was of disappointing them all. Here come the discussions because the blonde understands how painful it is to pretend to be someone else and wants to support Mary. But Alfred believes she should tell the truth to save her from the witch hunt, even though this could generate the volunteers' hatred. Jim arrives with more people and thinks the protagonists are trying to harm Mary, a concern that grows because the princess takes her to hide. The protagonists start fighting against Jim, although Deaf Float is humiliated by a falcon. But the important thing is that Mary's friend surrenders when they tell him that she is suffering because of this stupid game. Mary tells the blonde that Jin always wanted to make her happy because she was a lonely orphan. That's why they started the princess game. That's exactly what he tells the rest of the protagonists, which leads them to the conclusion that it's better to tell the truth instead of risking the lives of the volunteers, as they were quite determined to attack the capital. The revelation of this news has an obvious outcome. The common folk begin to insult them for having deceived them all this time. But this topic has to wait because the giant starts moving on its own and attacks the couple. This is the work of the twins, who are happy to see Alfred again and give him a warm greeting by summoning a bunch of specters. Mary is left lying on the ground due to the giant's attacks, but Jin stops his assaults because he remembers what truly matters to him, which is protecting his waifu's smile. The rest of the warriors decide to help her because she has given them hope all this time. However, it's Mariel who manages to bring down the wooden robot by damaging its structure. However, she trips and the robot is about to fall on her, just as the mountain starts moving, revealing that it's the statue from the story that once again moved to save a princess with a pure heart. Unfortunately, the statue ends up collapsing, though at least the twins decided to retreat because the chapter is about to end. I can't think of another reason, as they are also aware of the legend, yet it still doesn't occur to them to think that the true princess is there. Lastly, Alfred still hasn't connected the neurons in his brain to realize that the blonde boy he knows as Marius is the true princess. But at least they've gained a new ally, as Mary tells the blonde to find the real princess and let her know that she will help whenever she can. I don't know how useful the help of an ordinary girl like her would be, but at least the blonde made a friend and is quite happy about it. We return to Alfred's lands, and a new problem arises. Apparently, Nanor ordered medicinal plants, but there are very few. According to the merchant, the town called Kokon, which supplies almost 80% of the kingdom's medicinal herbs, currently seems like a ghost town. At least that's the rumor he's heard due to the shortage of plants and their extremely high price. Float knows this town, so it seems strange to him that such an important place would suddenly turn into a ghost town. But for now, they can only cover the costs of the medicines with a subsidy from Alfred. Non-Noria is still worried about not having enough medicine for when some of the protagonists get hurt, so the rest have decided to go to Kokon to buy more and investigate the matter. The maid wants to go with them, but Alfred doesn't let her because it could be quite dangerous. So she asks Mauricio for a favor, which I imagine will be to entertain her while the others are traveling. On the way, they mention that this town has a vast water source that helps the plants, and that some of its villagers have perfected their knowledge of general medicine, attracting many people from other places. The issue is that the main road is blocked by some members of the ecclesiastical order, who claim that the town has been deserted due to floods. The protagonists believe this is a blatant lie, so they decide to take an alternative route guided by Deaf Float, who claims to know how to get there because he was there in the past doing business. To their surprise, when they enter the town, they see that everything is perfectly fine, and the people are working as if nothing had happened. So they decide to ask an old man who was resting. He's surprised to see outsiders because 2 years ago, members of the order arrived to establish checkpoints on the roads and take control of the entire town and the hospital. Here, a man named Adele appears, an old priest who believes he lost all his right to serve God due to his sin. It turns out that he was sent to the town of Pedale during the petrification plague. The disease scared him so much that he ended up abandoning the town, so he blames himself for letting so many people die. To atone for his sins, he has decided to help this town and wants to tell them what the church is doing here. He takes them to a hill while talking a bit about the town of Pedale, and also about Deaf Float's father. Once they reach their destination, he shows them the hospital in the distance. The place is full of security because there are people infected with the Petrides virus. It wasn't just the town of Pedale, it was just the most affected. Adele believes they are conducting experiments on the sick people and wants their help to free them by infiltrating the canal where they get their water. The problem is that Alfred refuses to do this without informing George, as the church's power could end up turning against the protagonists, just as Didier said when he wanted to arrest his friend. Deaf Float and Mariel are a bit disappointed to see that he's afraid of the church, so they forcefully take him along. But later, Alfred explains the real reason. He doesn't deny that he's afraid, because a traitorous feudal lord is usually imprisoned. The kingdom takes over his territory and people, so the church could end up abusing the people of his lands. In other words, he has always feared for his people, not for himself, which is something true, quite respectable, unlike the blonde who usually does things without thinking. What's curious is that there are zombies here too, and we see that Deaf Float still has trouble attacking them because he still thinks about the people of his village. The whole zombie thing is starting to become very suspicious, especially because they arrive at a room where all the sick people are gathered, and at first glance, it's clear they are not having a good time. For now, they can't do anything for them, and now that they have confirmed the existence of this place, they must retreat and inform George. But Deaf Float takes too long to do this and gets hit hard by the giant guardian who fights like a wrecking ball. Dr. Graff, the scoundrel responsible for everything happening here, also appears. He has managed to create drugs that inhibit pain, which is why the giant continues as if nothing happened after Deaf Float's attacks. On top of that, this guy starts mocking the sick, saying he created those drugs to experiment on them, just as the Pope ordered. The rest of the protagonists are almost discovered, but the blue-haired one decides to hide them and fight alone since they need to report these atrocities. If their faces are seen, an order will be given to capture them. To make matters worse, the ecclesiastical knights appear, and the giant starts beating up the blue-haired one, so Mariel decides to stay as reinforcement to let Alfred escape. She starts fighting this guy but also receives a powerful attack, which angers Alfred. He orders the cat to go with Adele since he has realized that his duty to protect the citizens of his lands also means protecting his friends. So, he fights for the just cause his father once pursued. Together with his friends, he manages to defeat this bald guy, and from there, he plans to imprison the doctor. But before that can happen, Didier, the Smoke and Mirrors Knight, appears. He's here to shut me up because the protagonists are not dragons, and he can humiliate them with a single slap. He's tired of the protagonist meddling in his affairs all the time, so he's delighted by the discovery he's just made. It turns out that Mariel's hair came loose, and Didier realizes she is the princess, although he only says out loud that she is the Plague Witch, accusing the other two of being her accomplices. Alfred and the blue-haired one find themselves in prison, waiting for answers because they don't understand what's happening. Lucan, an old acquaintance of the protagonist who is now the chief of the prison guards, appears. A very serious man who only follows orders and doesn't plan to help them. In fact, he tells them that Mariel will be executed and they will be taken to trial. Meanwhile, the blonde is being tormented by her nightmares because now all of Alfred's village is in danger because of her. On top of that, she thinks her brother hates her for being selfish since she feels she abandoned him to live a happy life outside the palace. After that, she keeps seeing images of all the loved ones she lost because of the werewolf, who could return at any moment for her brother. After that, she wakes up tied up in a room where some jailers have been trying to extract information about her witch companions and how to reverse the curse since they have bought into the church's cheap story. However, Didier wants to be alone with her for a moment to apologize because he knows that's not the treatment a princess should receive. Meanwhile, Alfred and Deaf Float take advantage of a guard's oversight to escape. The Dark Knight frees Mariel from her chains to tell her what will happen to her. It turns out that her brother has ordered the worst punishment for the witch, something that, in theory, is the Pope's decision. But Didier tells her she shouldn't be so sure about that. Finally, he apologizes as a knight for not having met her from the beginning, so he is willing to show her the whole truth as his final act of kindness towards her. He uses his magic to give the blonde a tour of his memories, showing her his mother being happy and also when she was about to die shortly after the birth of her brother. The important thing came several days after that, as Mariel saw her father using magic to revive his deceased wife. Didier appeared to explain what was happening but decided to seal those memories so she wouldn't know the mistake her father made by using that spell. The king committed a tremendous taboo that gradually caused the downfall of the kingdom, the betrayal of Rugas, the death of her loved ones, the appearance of monsters, and the fact that her brother is the Pope's puppet. All these things were caused by her father's poor decisions. The worst part is that she is just like the old king, as Alfred's village will be punished because of her, just like the protagonist and the blue-haired one, who are still fleeing from the guards. Fortunately for them, Mauricio had already infiltrated the order to help them escape. So, they are both given back their weapons so they can defend themselves. As they exit the prison, Lucan is waiting for them with a few soldiers. He unleashes all his anger on Mauricio because he considers him a coward, believing that the one-eyed man let the princess, to whom they both swore loyalty, die. Mauricio takes advantage in the fight and corrects him, saying he still maintains his pride as a warrior, and is carrying out this mission precisely to save the person he swore loyalty to. Alfred hears this and finally realizes that he has been living with Mariel all this time, giving him an even greater reason to save her, as she is the last hope of this kingdom. The Pope receives news that Bertrand's squadron has disappeared in combat, which adds to the strange mobilization of Olivier's troops. Didier tells him that they have already discovered the identity of the princess, and are planning a civil war. Alexis orders the Dark Knight to deal with all of them immediately, which prompts the man to use teleportation magic. This alarms the Pope because that ability belongs to a legend of Magania, meaning that he must get rid of him before he becomes a threat to his plans. The blonde is about to be condemned, but before her feet leave the ground, Alfred arrives and cuts the rope with a sword. Both he and the blue-haired one take care of almost all the guards while Mariel cries and begs them to leave so they won't get hurt because of her. But no, Alfred may be a somewhat boring protagonist, but he is still very loyal and doesn't plan on abandoning her. However, he must face Didier if he wants to take her away. This is the main problem. No matter how motivated our boy is, he and Deaf Float are no match for the Dark Knight. They would need at least an entire army to take him down. But let's not say more because Bertrand and his army arrive, breaking through a wall to support them. Unlike Adele Jade, who enters through the door with his soldiers like civilized people, they are not the only ones, as the couple and the army of volunteers are also here. And of course, let's not forget about Adele, Mauricio, and Lucan, who now know that the princess is completely alive. I must say that I don't like it when fights keep switching every 2 seconds, but this time I didn't mind because they are quite well done. The standout moments include the Dark Knight holding his own in a fight against Lucan, Adele Jade, and Mauricio at the same time, as well as the protagonist defeating the executioner who was after Mariel. In the end, Didier opts to teleport because he is completely outnumbered, so the rescue mission has been a complete success. Well, don't let the smiles fool you because they have now declared themselves enemies of the church, so nothing good awaits the people of Alfred. But for now, he simply visits his father's grave to tell him everything that has happened, while Mariel arrives to tell him the truth directly for the first time. She also apologizes for her capricious and moralistic behavior, but Alfred tells her not to worry about that since his father taught him that the royal family must act as a flame that illuminates the people in darkness. His job as a knight is to ensure that the flame doesn't go out, so he decides to swear total loyalty to protect her from all the dangers to come until they restore the kingdom to its former glory. On top of that, she received the news that they were imprisoned, and just a couple of days after returning, they want to leave again. Deaf Float's problem is that he feels uncomfortable being around the princess because he has been very rude and insolent to her all this time, thinking she was a boy. The one who has no problem changing his attitude is Alfred, who behaves like a true knight, which annoys Mariel as she's not used to him calling her princess all the time. Mauricio brings the blue-haired one before her to tell her to punish him for his insolence all this time. But he knows that the blonde considers this guy her friend, so his punishment ends up being to protect her forever alongside Alfred. Honoria appears, trying to get everyone's attention, but since they ignore her, she yells to inform them that she will be joining them on this journey because she's tired of having to stay behind. Hoping that nothing bad has happened to them, Alfred is worried about going because this battle is going to be much more dangerous than any other they have had. But Noria has been preparing for this since her archery skills are magnificent, thanks to the time she spent training with Mauricio. After seeing her performance, an advisor of Adele Jade appears to take them to a place where they are being awaited. He guides them to a cabin hidden among the trees that seems abandoned at first glance. It is the place where the girl with the strange hair, whom we saw earlier, lives. She introduces herself to the princess and apologizes for the offense she is about to commit. She places her hand near the princess's face, and the blonde faints. Before Alfred can go on the defensive, his friend explains that this girl does not want to harm Mariel. Her name is La Croa, and she is a witch. A soldier from Camellia informs his leader of everything that has been happening within the kingdom of Hortensia, leading Rugas to deduce that the princess is alive since that's the only explanation for why Adele Jade has mobilized his troops. This is very beneficial for them because currently, the Duchess of Olivier has turned her city into a meeting place for all those who oppose the church. However, according to her, they must find someone else before making their move, at which point they introduce this girl with strange hair and magical eyes who wants to analyze the princess. Now we return to Deaf Float doing silly things while Nori packs her things because she's very upset with everyone for having disappeared for so long. The princess is submerged in her memories with her mother while the witch analyzes her mind. At the same time, Adele Jade comments that she wandered the world selling powerful medicines until she caught the attention of the church and took refuge in Olivier. According to the little witch, this was just a cover. In reality, witches are sentinels of Megon, people who possess all the knowledge related to the powers of this legend. Mariel's mind is reliving her 6th birthday, a time when everyone in the kingdom was happy. Fernando spoke to her about his son Leo for the first time, introduced her to his daughter, and even Rugas was celebrating with them. These are the moments of happiness that should have lasted forever, but we return to the death of her mother and the beginning of her father's madness. The memory that the witch needs is from the moment they tried to revive her mother, which seems to have been the Pope's idea, as he held in his hands this scroll known as the Great Relic of Magania. In this scroll resides all the power of the legend. It is unknown when it appeared in this world, but whoever controls its power can fulfill any wish they have, such as reviving the dead or creating an ideal speech that can convince almost everyone. The witch hunt began to control the absolute power of this scroll, but it was the selfish desires of the old king and the Pope that brought chaos to this world. Since that fateful incident, monsters appear or transform thanks to the power the scroll has left scattered around the world. Mariel could use the scroll to turn back time, prevent her mother's death, and create the future that should have happened. But not doing so would mean acting selfishly according to her desires, just like her father. Alfred's words remind her of what is important: we must not erase history, but rather learn from it so we do not make the same mistakes again. She plans to be the one who guides people toward a better future without trampling on anyone's sacrifice or thinking selfishly. This is precisely what the witch was seeking. Everything she made her remember was to tempt her in her most deplorable mental state, to see if she would give in to her desires or overcome them. This means she has passed the Sentinel's test, which gives her the right to wield the relic to use it for good. But first, they must take it from the Pope. For now, everything is laughter between Mariel and the protagonist, but at that very moment, a vision of Alfred dead appears in Teresa's mind. She learned everything they have planned, but using her power to project these visions has left her too exhausted. So, Rugas tells her she must stay and rest. He will take care of everything in the capital. Now, Mariel gives her speech to rally all her troops to the capital, at which point we see almost all the secondary characters who have gathered so far. But I won't name them because I'm tired of saying so many strange names at this point. Leaving that aside, the only one the one-eyed man misses is his master. According to the Duchess, she sent him a recruitment letter, but he did not respond. Moreover, his whereabouts are completely unknown, which worries Mauricio, a justified concern, because we see how he is attacked by a mysterious figure who only smiles. He is not the only problem because the protagonists manage to see Camelia's army and are immediately attacked with magic by the hateful twins. Now we move on to see the Pope complaining a bit about the poor job Didier did on his previous mission, ensuring that he does not make the same mistake again. Here, a new character named Flegel appears, who wants to be the new captain of the guard, and for that reason, he took it upon himself to offer Didier a place in the ranks. Abulo, meaning Mauricio's teacher, tells him that he still has competition for that position since Alfred is still alive. However, this is merely motivation for him to go after the protagonist because he harbors a certain hatred and envy towards him. Speaking of the protagonist, he wants to put an end to these twin sisters who are only causing chaos wherever they go. But this time, it won't be necessary for them to fight. Roy shoots a few arrows at their subordinates as a warning not to attack the princess's army again. Otherwise, Teresia will be the one to receive punishment on their behalf. It turns out that the redhead is not there to fight against the protagonists, and he swears he won't launch a single attack against them, an idea that the church doesn't share, as they appear and begin to attack. This is a problem because the ecclesiastical order has more advanced technology than the rest, so they have already managed to manufacture the first firearms, which can easily defeat spears and swords due to their range. The arrows can't even reach these people. But luckily, the old weapons required quite a bit of time to reload, which the protagonists take advantage of to defeat them. They were only able to defeat them because of the reload time and because it was a relatively small group. But in larger numbers, they could pose too high a risk to their troops. Later that night, the twins are saved from being punished, for now, because they are citizens of the Empire, and Rugas wants to maintain the alliance with them for the time being. Anyway, the truce with Alfred is still in place, and he orders his troops to withdraw for a while. However, the princess's allies find it dangerous to have them behind their backs. According to Alfred and Mauricio, they shouldn't worry too much about them because Roy staked his pride, the most valuable quality for a Camellia warrior, so that pride won't allow him to break his part of the deal. The other problem remains the muskets the church possesses, something Adelgade and Bertrand already knew about thanks to spies, but they had only seen plans of them and did not expect to see them in combat so soon. The good news is that they are not particularly accurate, but they can penetrate armor from great distances, so they must remain very cautious. We also see Flegel meeting with his men. He was the one who sent that mini troop with the muskets to test them out, but he already suspected they would be defeated due to their small numbers. What he's pleased about is knowing that the weapons worked quite well, and that a huge shipment of muskets has just arrived, and that the protagonist is leading the princess's army on the front line. The clash between these two groups begins at a river because Flegel has planned to block their passage at the bridge, which will be a clear target for his weapons. The surprise for the protagonists is seeing the mediocre grandson of the old man commanding that army, as he himself put it. But I don't want to get into the details of military strategies, so just watch how some stay crossing the bridge using iron plates as shields, while the protagonist and the blue-haired one advance through the river with a few soldiers to surprise them. Roy sees all this from a hill and decides to help them. First, Alfred arrives and starts taking down several soldiers, so Flegel grabs a musket to kill him himself. Unfortunately for him, the redhead has such good aim that he manages to hit the bolt of his weapon, disabling it. He then commands his troops to cover the protagonists. Flegel should retreat because the losses are too great, but he is unwilling to give up after having sacrificed even his grandfather's life to get this position. All this madness for power is driven by his obsession with the protagonist, which causes his army to abandon him. But he doesn't plan to stand idly by. Do you want to know what I find funniest? Since this character was introduced, I imagined how much I would laugh if the protagonist had no idea who he was when they met. And it happened. While Alfred was talking to the others about how close they were to victory in this battle, that idiot attacked him from behind, but the protagonist blocked his attack while asking, "Who are you?" That is to say, Flegel is obsessed with someone who doesn't even know he exists. Quite pathetic. On top of that, he challenges him to a duel for the victory of the battle when he barely has any soldiers left. All the while, he complains that he was always compared to him, that everything was handed to Alfred, and that his family considered him a disgrace because they only focused on the protagonist's achievements and not his own. This guy is nowhere near being able to surpass Alfred, who dominates him in combat and takes his sword. The difference between them is so great that Alfred even manages to block a treacherous shot with his sword and then breaks Flegel's weapon. What a pro. Maria tells the protagonist that nothing was handed to him. Everything is the result of his training and determination, forged by loss. He was motivated by the love of his loved ones, which made him rise again and again. That's something Flegel doesn't possess, which is why he will never be able to surpass him. They spare his life and head towards the capital, something the church won't do. One of the church's knights appears to put an end to him because the church doesn't tolerate incompetence like his. The Pope is aware of this situation because he knew he would only gain some time by sending this guy. But time is precisely what he needed for his plans. The protagonists continue advancing towards the capital while we see another motivational speech from the princess. Additionally, we see George again, who is about to atone for his mistakes by going on a mission that will probably cost him his life. They finally manage to reach the capital, where the old master awaits them since his grandson was so useless that he couldn't finish him off. Supposedly, he knocked him out from behind and threw him off a cliff, yet not a single bone was broken. This Vestor is called the armored and immortal hero for a reason. This guy apologizes for separating the princess from her brother, but she forgives him because she knows that everything originated due to her father. Two things to highlight in all of this. First, Rugas leaves the command to Roy because he plans to go with the twins to fight on his own, and it seems he doesn't plan to return alive. Secondly, George continues to lead the ecclesiastical order against the protagonists, so it must be Mauricio who stops him since he knows his strategies the best and, therefore, knows where to attack him. Meanwhile, the Pope is preparing a ritual with the relic that will guarantee them victory, so he needs Didier to go support the troops to buy more time. Alfred and Def Float split up to rescue the surrounded soldiers. The princess asks Adele Jade to take her to the protagonist because she has a bad feeling, and Mauricio reaches George's location to have a one-on-one battle. What matters most to us is that Mariel was right because Didier appears to finish off the protagonists finally. As usual, he gives them a beating, but this time the princess tries to negotiate with him to stop serving the Pope, something he isn't willing to do. As I mentioned earlier, Alexei is performing a spell that absorbs the negative emotions of people during this conflict, which will grant him enough power to control the relic. We return to the battle, and the good guys are practically lying on the ground. Alfred continues fighting and manages to take one of Didier's weapons, but the Dark Knight throws him to the ground, forcing Mariel to cover him. This creates an opening to finish off the princess, so the protagonist steps in to take the blow. Before this happens, Mariel launches a strange power that pushes Didier back, allowing Alfred to land a critical hit. The knight tells her she is a carrier but doesn't have time to explain what that means because his wound is too severe, and he has to teleport out of the fight. Mauricio has also defeated the captain of the order, who then decides to tell him his reasons for continuing to support the Pope. Apparently, few in the church know the true nature of their former companion, a priest who climbed the ranks over a mountain made of those who opposed him. More than 90% of his followers genuinely believe he is a good person, so the captain continues to support him to avoid shattering his dream, which is utterly irresponsible, to be honest, since those guys have committed many abuses because of their faith. Alexei has finally completed his spell and creates an infinity gem with all those negative emotions to place it on his forehead. I think it's time to see the main villain's backstory in this story. It turns out that he was poor, and his dying mother told him with her last words that he was the king's son and apologized for not giving him the life he deserved. But Alexei knew it wasn't his mother's fault but the king's for abandoning them to their fate. That's why he joined the church to make him suffer, and now he controls the government, thanks to being able to manipulate his half-brother. Meanwhile, Mariel wants the church to surrender so there won't be more victims on either side, a rather unlikely request, which means they'll have to enter the palace to confront the Pope. The old armored hero tells them they'll need to enter through the secret passage they used in the past to escape, meaning he'll go to the palace to open the door for them. From here, we see Alfred visiting Noria while she helps the wounded. He sees that her foot is injured and helps her bandage it, but the reason he's there is to ask her to stay behind. The final mission is going to be very dangerous, and he doesn't want her to get hurt, something she accepts on the condition that he promises to return safely. And well, I don't know if this counts as a confession because she tells him, "Promise you'll come back to me," in a somewhat romantic setting. But I don't know if that matters since the anime hasn't hinted at a single romance so far, except for the couple on the island. Anyway, the protagonists advance through the underground passage towards the palace, but along the way, a bunch of zombies appear, and Deaf Float gets scared because he unconsciously keeps searching for the faces of people from his village. That's why he decides to stay and fight alone, a battle he needs to overcome his fears, and besides, if he dies, he'll have the honor of being mourned by the princess. Obviously, that is not the plan, but anyway, he asks Adele Jade if she will cry for him. Since the moment he saw her, he has tried to flirt with her because he likes her a lot, and the Duchess seems to have been gradually accepting his advances. So, she promises to give him her answer later. Here, something unexpected happens. The other four manage to advance to the palace, where there isn't a single guard. However, Adele Jade retreats because she feels someone calling her. At the same time, the other three are intercepted by a person, and their faces say it all. The only two guards present are the former Archduke Oliver and the father of the current Duchess, Leo, and in front of our protagonist is his deceased father, Sir Fernando. To understand this, we must travel back to the moment when the king tried to resurrect his wife, which was unsuccessful because he didn't have enough power from people's negative emotions. The Pope convinced him that he needed to generate hatred among the warriors of Camellia, so he stopped sending reinforcements to feed his power with all the resentment of their leader, who went to the palace to ask for help against the forces of the empire. That was the moment when the tragedy occurred because the king accused him of conspiring against the kingdom alongside Leo, who was only trying to defend Rugas because his request was reasonable. The hatred of the leader of Camellia caused him to transform into that monster, thanks to the relic, which made him lose control and begin attacking everyone indiscriminately. But we already saw this at the beginning of the series. We see Non-Noria reacting to the snow that is falling, which reminds her that it also snowed on the day it all happened. So she wants to help the others as she feels a bad sensation in her chest. Fernando's body, once her brother's, manages to communicate with his daughter, as does Leo with his. Both tell their daughters that they must defeat them because if they don't, they will end up killing everyone. Mauricio steps in, receiving damage to his other eye, as he promised his brother that he would take care of his legacy. However, Alfred and Adele Jade are ready for this battle, despite having to fulfill the cruelest request that could be asked of a child. It is something they must overcome for the sake of the princess and the kingdom. Adele Jade says a tearful farewell to her happiness after overcoming her father, just as he had always wished. At the same time, Fernando shows pride in his son for becoming such a strong knight, a touching moment for these parents. But it doesn't end here because Mauricio is also gravely injured and asks them to go on without him, promising that he will just rest for a while to heal his wounds. However, when he is left alone, he tells his brother that he has fulfilled his promise to keep them safe, and now he can rest in peace and make way for the new generation. This also includes Non-Noria, who is already advancing through the passageway, and of course, Deaf Float, who emerges from the water in the sewers after defeating the zombies. Together, they go to catch up with the others. Alfred and Mariel enter the throne room, where they find a confused Charlotte who has finally been freed from the Pope's mind control, as he no longer needs him. The protagonist thanks Lexi for allowing him to reunite with his father one more time. But that doesn't make up for all the damage he has done, so he must stop him now. Everything starts getting really intense because the Pope confesses that he wants revenge against the royal family. To do so, he uses his powers obtained from that weird infinity gem, extending his hands, which have eyes, and those eyes grow enormous, and two girls connected to those things appear. Additionally, he transforms into a female demon. These demons are very powerful but not as powerful as the power of the script, which dictates that Mariel now knows how to use that strange power she used against Didier, even though she has no idea what it is. And if that wasn't enough, she can also transfer that power to the protagonist's sword. We have two fewer eyeballs to fight against, but the main demon is still alive and has some pretty strong gravity powers. Luckily, Rugas arrives to finish off the Pope, as he never wanted the rebellion to happen in the first place. He clears the way for the protagonists to deliver the final blow, breaking Alexi's gem with his illuminated sword. Mariel forgives Rugas for everything he has done because he never opposed the kingdom, only the corruption of Alexi. Besides, an alliance with them is beneficial. The downside is that the Pope is still alive and has some very bad news. The Magania relic was taken by Didier because it was his from the beginning. Also, by breaking his gem, all the power was released into the world, creating a full moon, which in turn causes Rugas to transform again, ending Alexi's life and fighting against the protagonists. Alfred manages to inflict significant damage, but the wolf strikes back with a swipe and leaves. The princess holds the poor protagonist in his final moments, where he only wants to say goodbye to her, and she can only cry over his loss. I was about to conclude the summary, thinking it ended here, but we see Mariel giving a speech as the new queen, showing all the secondary characters who survived, including Mauricio, who is now blind, and Alfred. However, the witch comments that Mariel committed a huge taboo by releasing a forbidden power that resurrected the protagonist due to her grief. She is unaware that the one who just woke up is not the same Alfred she knows.